About 6 or 7 weeks ago, two of my colleagues in the community asked me if I would go out to the community to visit a patient who has a tracheostomy and had extensive cancer of his throat. And it's a long time since I've been out in the field in this sense. And there I was, travelling down into the community with all my knowledge and skills in my head, my policies, my procedures, my knowledge of everything about tracheostomies. And we pulled up outside this huge tower block. And when I got into the room, I was faced with a very emaciated man with only his pyjama bottoms on, sat on a hard chair, surrounded by boxes and tubes and batch numbers and clinical stuff. And he had sputum coming out of his tube and all down his chest and the stench, and he had it all on the floor and a towel on the floor. And as I walked towards him, I remember feeling, oh my God, this man is looking at me as a person that's going to change his life, that I'm going to whisk him out of here to the hospice because we were ready for him. And as I went to him, part of me felt really repulsed by what I saw. And as I knelt down beside him and looked at the state he was in, I just had to say to him, gosh, I said, you've been through a lot. And he just looked at me and just nodded. And then he got a pen and he started to write. Part of me just wanted to get into the tasks of the tube and the cleaning and let me do some suctioning. And he just said, in writing, please can I stay at home? And I just thought, how can we take him from this, even though he needs to be taken from this? So I looked at him and I just said, you can stay. And his face changed from the most haunted expression to something of relief. I said, let me wash your tubes at least and change your Riella bag, which is what I did. And out we went, and I sat in the car with my colleague and I said, you know, I feel as though I've done absolutely nothing for this man, but yet I feel as though I've done everything.
Part of my role involves bereavement work with children and their families who might not have necessarily been connected to the hospice previously, and it's one of those families that I wanted to talk about today. Mum had died a few months before, and Dad was caring for both girls and really struggling. It was one of those referrals that I didn't think was ever going to lead to anything. They were very much at loggerheads. He found it very hard to share how he was feeling with his daughters. But then for the last couple of years we'd organised a children's remembrance service. We had an artist in and we made lanterns and we floated them on the pond in the garden. Just a little bit of kind of prodding a couple of weeks before, goodness, wouldn't it be nice to see you there? And to our absolute astonishment, he turned up on the night. And we have a photograph of him with his two girls at the end of that evening, with his arms around both of them and a huge smile on his face. They'd both been crying, but it felt really, really important that he was able to come and do that. But we didn't need to expect anything of him here. We just managed to make him feel welcome. And so he was able to share something with his daughters. It was very important.
I've worked here for more than 10 years, and my job is to provide an ordered sanctuary for patients, family and staff. A place that feels familiar and safe. Here's an instant where I feel that I've made a difference. I'm going to tell it like a story. I never saw her in the gardens, never met her before she asked me for the huge favour. I want you to help me. It's about my cat. He's back at my flat and there's no one to look after him when I've gone. He could go in the garden. I can see you have others that you look after. I painted him myself. He died 16 years ago and I got a little statue of him specially. But there's no one to look after him. I was very relieved. I looked her in the eye and I told her I had just the place for him. As I left, she smiled and waved, but when I looked back, her head was down and her eyes were closing. And if you look in the garden, you'll see Loffy by the fish pond.
Thank you to all four panellists for very different but very powerful stories. So what I'm going to do now is invite you to share with the rest of the group any reflections you have on what you've heard, and we'd love to hear about that.
I think you all know I'm quite new to the hospice, so those stories and the sort of range and depth of those stories are really helpful to people like me to sort of get an understanding, as Bridget said, of what happens underneath the surface, because they're very human stories and very touching and moving stories. And I really like that you've all come from different backgrounds as well to tell the different parts of the story.
The more we realise that we can make a difference to people's lives just by smiling, just by a general interaction with each other. And if we feel sometimes that we're not making a difference, there's a Mother Teresa story which I'll tell very quickly. She was asked why she bothered doing what she was doing, because she wasn't making a difference to world poverty. And she told the story of the seashore, and starfish were swept up on the seashore, and she began throwing them back in, one after the other. And somebody stopped her and said, "Why are you doing that? There are millions of starfish. What difference are you making?" And she looked at one and she said, "I'll make a difference to this one."
Sometimes it's not your skill that you can offer, it's yourself. And I went on one home visit, and the guy, he'd lost his mobility and was desperate to get it back, and I left thinking, well, there's nothing really I can do, no exercise is going to help, and generally just had that feeling of that was really, you know, unhelpful, and I felt really quite deflated. But one thing I did do before I left is I stood up and shook his hand and wished him a happy Father's Day. And at the door, his wife greeted me left me with a massive hug and said, "Thank you so much, you've really made a difference." And I kind of said, "Well, I don't really feel like I've done much." And she said, "The fact that you've come means that you care enough."
I suppose the things that popped into my mind were being a ward sister in the 1980s in a ward where patients had abdominal surgery, and would often, the surgery would go wrong and they'd have massive wounds and be in for months. And actually, I can name about 6 or 7 of those patients still. And I suppose I was thinking that those sorts of people are the ones that stay with you, the ones that you did make a difference to. But I'm sure everybody's got a story.
I was involved in a befriending project for people who were dying at home, and one of the people who was dying at home was a nurse, was a palliative care nurse. And going to her to do an evaluation and ask, well, how is it making a difference to you that you have a befriender? And she just said, well, I've never died before. And then she just went on to say, just knowing that somebody cared, that's what really matters to me.
I think it's just, for me, just the art of being present to another human person, just to let go, and the temptation to be task-oriented or to do something. That was a big lesson for me, because I went out with an objective, and it was just that moment of actually, no, that isn't the right thing. And being brave, as you say, brave enough to trust your gut instinct in that, and that all will be well.
I think it takes a great deal of skill and knowledge to be brave enough to behave in a way that you didn't plan to behave in, or to say things that you didn't plan. Actually takes a lot of knowledge and experience. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming. I'd like to just say a very big thanks to the panel, so if we can say thank you.